The screech of the tires shook Jocks out of his sleep. The abrupt stop lurched him forward in the train's seat, and his newspaper flopped to the ground. He blinked a few times to wake himself up, and then looked out the window. Snow had been falling steadily and blanketed the mountainous region in white. Far in the distance, the black foothills were barely visible in the twilight, and every few meters a clump of weedy, straggly green trees poked through the snow. The train wasn't supposed to stop until it reached its destination, Holberg, on the other side of the mountains. Jocks glanced around to see if he might have missed an announcement, but the train's other occupants seemed just as confused as he was. The two fashionable ladies, a few seats behind him, were talking quickly in a language he didn't recognize. The young man who'd been eyeing the fashionable ladies was glancing about the carriage, as though someone might be able to explain the delay. The thick-set bearded man and his petite wife opposite Jocks were quiet, but they seemed just as puzzled. "What's going on?" the young man asked. "Are we there already?" "Not for another few hours," the bearded man replied. He rose from his seat with a sigh. Let me check." The carriage was silent during the few minutes that the bearded man was gone. When he returned, he only shrugged. They say we're snowed in." "Isn't this supposed to be a snowproof train?" The young man sounded indignant. One of the fashionable ladies made a comment to her friend, and they both smothered snickers. "There's no such thing as a snowproof train," Jocks said, shuffling his newspaper back in order, folding it onto the seat beside himself.
"This one is designed to make it through the light and moderate snow, but will be inhibited by anything heavy."
"Still, though," the young man said, looking out the window, "it's not quite heavy, is it?" Jocks had to agree. The snow was thick enough to blanket, but he thought he'd still be able to walk through it reasonably well. The train shouldn't have any problems, but of course, there was a multitude of inconveniences that might have stopped them, such as an avalanche or falling rocks, or even just tracks that had succumbed to the weather and broken apart. One of the train's assistants burst through the door at the back of the carriage and dashed down the aisle. The young man tried to call to him, but the assistant didn't stop.
Come back here.
Jocks had a brief impression of a blanketed face and bulging white eyes before the man was past him. The air displaced by his motion, ruffling the newspaper again. Then he was through the door at the other end of the carriage, presumably moving towards the train's engine. The young man was demanding explanation again, even though it was clear that no one in the carriage knew any more than he did.
Come on, answer me.
Jocks tuned him out as he stared through the window at the soft, drifting snow. He shifted forward in his seat and frowned. Despite the strength of the moon, the patchy trees and high mountains left most of the surrounding terrain in shadow. Jax thought as though he'd seen a shape moving through the woods, just beyond the square light coming from his window. Is that a person or a wolf? A voice came through the train's intercom, sounding hurried and tense.
Apologies for the brief delay,
it said at the time as the train gave a jolt and began moving in reverse.
We have encountered unexpected obstacles and are required to return to Lakeview tonight.
What? The young man rose out of his seat. "That's a full 2 hours away." "Hush," the thickest man said. Jocks noticed he's squeezing his wife's hand. "I'm certain they have a good reason." "But I have a hotel booked." Jocks didn't interrupt, but a prickling worry dug at him. He remembered his mother telling him stories about the mountains and the snow beasts that had hid in their caves. Fairy tales, of course, but still. The train was gradually picking up speed, slinking along the track away from the narrow mountain pass it had been trying to move through. Jocks had barely relaxed in his seat when it gave another jolt. "What now?" the young man snapped, but everyone else in the carriage froze. The motion hadn't been anything remotely like the way the train was supposed to move. It was a harsh jerk in the wrong direction, as though something momentarily large was pulling the train to a halt. Sound of screaming metal filled the carriage, making the fashionable woman clasp her hands over their ears. The young man, the bearded man, and Jocks pulled their window open and leaned their torsos as far out as the train as they dared. Jocks looked toward the front carriage, but the night and flurries obscured the view. He thought, however, that the carriage seemed to be tilting upward. "Run!" the bearded man cried, pushing his wife out of her seat and dragging her towards the carriage rear door. "It has the train! Stop looking! Run!" Everything was in motion. Jocks pushed out of his chair and joined the others, running to the carriage's door as the sound of screams from farther up the train had reached him. He followed the fashionable ladies outside into the icy mountains. The frozen wind bit at his face, but he didn't dare go back for his luggage. In the distance, he saw the outline of a beast silhouetted against the starry sky, impossibly large, lifting the first carriage clear off the tracks and raising it like a child picking up a toy. Jocks didn't dare look back again, but focused on the ground ahead of him. He heard more carriage doors slam, followed by the screams of their occupants fleeing the shuddering, jerking train. He tried to stay with the group, knowing that survival together was way more likely than survival alone, and only realized his error as the forerunner. The young man screamed. A dark shape had darted out of the shadows and thrown him to the ground. Two more followed quickly, sinking black teeth into the man's limbs as he fought for his life. It was nearly impossible for Jocks to peel his eyes away, but when he did, he saw more of the black creatures. Parasites, his mind told him. They're parasitic creatures picking off the prey they're brought down by the apex predator, materializing out of the shadows and bringing down the fleeing men and women. Jocks froze, unsure of what to do. Should he return to the carriage that might afford safety from the black creatures, but make him vulnerable to the gigantic, hulking monster that blotted out the moon? Or continue with his companions and hope for the best? He never had a chance to make up his mind. The next moment, 3 sets of razor-sharp teeth sank into his back. This all happened on Christmas Day,
2 years ago.